my gosh. Okay. Oh, wow. Thank you. Before, I have a lot going on this table, y'all. First of all, can y'all do me a favor and, my son thinks, he's like, you're not talking to 500 people. I'm like, yes, I am. So I need to send him proof. So, make funny faces, whatever. Okay. Thank you, Jay. I'm also getting over a thing, so if I cough a little bit and drink some tea, that's what I'm doing. So a few days ago, Wes Studi became the first Native American actor and Indigenous American actor to win an Academy Award at the 11th Annual Governor's Award. I just read about this on the plane ride today. Wes is Cherokee, and I remember him best from his role as Magua in Last of the Mohicans. And since, he's played many, much more larger and more developed roles since then, and it took till now. And I can't remember how long he's been acting, decades, for him to win this award. And so when he got on stage, he said something really short, and then he's like, about time. So I'm kind of in the same mind space of like, about time. Not because I feel like I deserve this, but because a lot of us in this room and outside this room have been working on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion issues and opportunities and outdoor recreation and education and conservation for a long time. And many others have done this before me, and it's rare that we're acknowledged for our work in this way. Usually when we're doing our work, we're trying to get someone to confront their own implicit bias and privilege and whiteness and address toxic masculinity and transphobia and ableism and colonialism and reflect on the fraught history of public lands and recreation. And so you can imagine that we kind of get the opposite of an award. We get like anger and shame and denial and resentment and derision and resistance and all that stuff, and then we go home and cry, or at least I do. This work is really hard, as many of you know. In fact, I'm curious, raise your hand if you in some way have been responsible for diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work in your organization or in this sector. Yes, look at all of you, this is amazing. That's a lot of hands. So as you know, this work is hard. It's not just about, stanching a bloody wound or tying a figure eight or trying not to burn the hash browns on the whisper light, which I do think is a very important skill. But this work, it takes that extra emotional labor, and labor that doesn't get monetized and recognized. And especially for a person holding marginalized identities doing this work, that emotional labor can take quite the toll. So again, really thank you for this recognition. I'm gonna do something a little different. I realize I have the privilege of speaking last at past dinner time on the first night. So bear with me here, and hopefully this will be more interesting than my normal thing, which is I get up on a podium and I'm like, 10 big learnings on Jedi, or 20 strategies for engaging in Jedi work, and I keep it pretty impersonal, so you can hire me for that. Instead, I kind of want to get a little bit more personal. I'm not much of a storyteller. I haven't told a lot of my own stories. I haven't come from that side of things when I'm doing this work. So I want to tell a couple stories. My son Kieran is 12, so not a teenager yet, Jay, but almost 12. Almost a teenager. And he's gone to a lot of schools because we've moved a lot. And in each of these schools, he receives feedback from teachers and administration, and it's run the gamut from, Kieran is a close talker, he can't keep his hands to himself, he can't pay attention, he's an interrupter, he's distracted, he asks too many questions. That last one is like, what? And within the span of 6 months, sometimes he'll go from oh, your son is such a sweet kid, to he's a ringleader in a group of kids that are clearly defiant. And in each of these schools, he's experienced some sort of bullying from peers, and it isn't just the run-of-the-mill bullying about oh, you have glasses, 4 eyes, that's what I used to get, or having bad music taste. He's been made fun of for being Indian, he's received racial epithets and slurs, he's been bullied based on non-gender conforming clothing choices, he's really into this pink button-up shirt, and I handed down my women's Patagonia jacket to him, and he wears it to school and gets made fun of. He was bullied for having a crush on a friend who's transgender and who just transitioned. He would often come home sad, dejected, feeling alone. And by the way, I read the speech to him last night, and he was like, Amma means mom in Tamil, you're making me look like really pathetic. I'm not that sad. But this has all happened to him, and this is a mom's perspective, so, and I have permission to give my perspective. I think that like whole thing last night was just his coping mechanisms for a lot of the stuff that happens to him. Those of you who know him know, like, yep, that's Kieran. So some of you may be thinking, yeah, especially if you have children, like, yeah, that's like middle school, that's parenting, and I agree. And I'll note that in all of the schools he's gone to, he's been one of few kids of color in a sea of white. He's half Indian and he's part Syrian. He can never pass as white racially and culturally. He very much believes he's Indian, and he has a really close affinity to my side of the family. So my side of the family is like all boister and volume and interrupting and close talking and hugs and tussles and roughhousing. And so everywhere he goes, because as Thich Nhat Hanh says, we are all a continuation of our ancestors. He's a continuation of my ancestors, and so he takes his family with him. And so whenever he has felt excluded, I've always wondered whether, like, is it because he's like a kid of color, or am I just like doing that thing? And as a mother of color in mostly white towns, I lived in Lander, Wyoming, Bozeman, Truckee, and now Eugene. I really didn't want to ever rock the boat. I was just like, I'm just gonna get by. I don't want to like make waves. So I would just stuff those suspicions back in from whence they came, whenever that happened. But just 2 months ago, Kieran said something that really floored me and his dad, Jamie. He said, whenever I start school, I just want to start from a clean slate. I stay quiet, I act proper and respectable, and the teachers say, oh, your son is so sweet. And then finally, I decide to let go and be myself. And the teachers say that I'm a problem. And then he went on to say, Amma, Appa, which is mom and dad in Tamil, I just want to be myself. Where can I be myself? And we said something like, what do you mean? Like, do the teachers not see you? And he responded, I don't want to be seen. I want to be known. And that's when I realized that my suspicions were true, that he was facing, cultural policing and respectability politics that come from educators who just didn't have the tools. They're not bad people, but people who didn't have the tools to hold a space for him to really feel a sense of belonging. And then that's also when I felt like his journey was paralleling mine, and it was sort of this moment. I often tell people that I'm wearing a mask. I had to put it on when I was young so I would be accepted. நான் தமிழ் பேசுறேன் ஆனா நிறைய பேருக்கு தெரியாது நான் தமிழ் பேசுறது. I can't speak that very well, but many of you don't know I speak Tamil. I changed my Indian accent. I stopped inviting kids to my house because my house, they all like, oh, it smells like curry. I started acting differently. I started speaking differently. I started dressing differently. I started holding myself higher just to feel more confident. I started acting more masculine. I became an engineer. I became a lawyer. I did all these things. And this is called code switching, and I think a lot of us in this room do it. And so today I've code switched for so long, I'm not even sure what part of me is me and what part of me is the mask that I don. Sorry, why am I crying? Over 35 years ago when we immigrated to the US. And so I'd like to say, like, no big deal, this is just me, but I know I'm wearing that mask, and that mask is hard work, and the emotional labor that goes into trying to fit in comes at a great cost. That identity stress that is something real and palpable. And it obviously was to me, it is to my son, and for every student or participant or colleague, even people in this room who hold marginalized identities. There's a term that comes to mind for me called imposter syndrome, and it describes what I feel happens when I assimilate for so long and I start questioning my own identity. I'm like, people say, am I brown enough? Am I Indian enough? Am I feminine enough? It happens for everyone. Am I man enough? And I tell you these stories, not for y'all to feel bad for me or bad for my kid. I'm telling you these stories because as teachers and leaders, all of us in this room have the opportunity to hold space for children like mine, or children like the one I used to be, who have so many different identities and experiences and face systemic barriers, disadvantages, and mistreatment, and sometimes intentional and sometimes not every day. And we don't just have that opportunity to see them, we have that opportunity to know them, so that they don't have to wear that mask every day. So they don't have to deal with things like code switching and imposter syndrome years down the road and start questioning their identities. So, you may ask, like, okay, why do I really need to know them? My friend Emily Lettingham answered this question for me years ago by sharing this quote by Adrienne Rich. Emily, where are you? Yeah, it was like, I don't know how many years ago. You showed this quote that like really resonated for me and still does. And this quote is, when those who have the power to name and to socially construct reality choose not to see you or hear you. When someone with the authority of a teacher, say, describes the world and you are not in it, there's a moment of psychic disequilibrium, as if you looked in a mirror and saw nothing. So imagine that. Imagine that we all have this power of painting a picture of the world for our participants and even for our colleagues, brown and black, poor and non-binary, queer, trans, all sizes, abilities, and more. And imagine if they can't find themselves on that map, what would happen? And as teachers and educators, these efforts to know our students are going to fall flat and we'll create that psychic disequilibrium if we continue to run our organizations in ways that where respectability politics and white colonial individualistic notions of how people should connect to our outdoor spaces and classrooms and what they should get out of our programs continues. So I have a few more things to say. If we don't have the power, if we have the power to know our students, but we don't get to know them just because we write them off as challenging or acting out, students or participants, sorry, I came from the Knowles world, so the student thing keeps coming into the language here. But if we write them off as challenging or acting out or just not a good fit because they make us uncomfortable, they're different from us, then we as educators are complicit in creating a world that continues to invisibilize students with marginalized identities, whose experiences are already erased every day by others. And it's not just like the emotional risk of exclusion that we're talking about with bullying and out-othering. It's also physical risk. Risk used to be this, lions and tigers and bears, oh my thing, or more like lightning and talus fields and bears, oh my. Oh, that was my attempt at being really witty. But when we add exclusion to the mix, then we have lightning and talus fields and bears, oh my, but then a student whose judgment has been severely compromised by experiences of othering. And then when we do this in an environment where there's physical risk, there's group dynamics, then we become the witches. I have to mention witches because Halloween's tomorrow, and in Middle English, witch is gender neutral, by the way. We're the witches who are mixing just the right ingredients in our cauldron to create the potential for all kinds of harm. In that cauldron goes backgrounds and histories and trauma, collective trauma, generational trauma, individual trauma, group dynamics, environmental factors. Suddenly we have this potion that amplifies risk. So there are numerous scenarios I could march through here, that situations that create this kind of cosmic harm. And you've probably either witnessed or heard of, or maybe even been an actor in situations like this. So we have situations like non-binary students being misgendered, students of color and indigenous students told that they're being defiant just because they're not looking, leaders in the eye. Students or participants of color are told not to enjoy the trails by building community because being rambunctious is not good trail ethics. Students from low-income families being told they need to build resilience and grit and character when a lot of them have it in spades from having to take care of their own families at home all the time. Students so stressed because they've never gone camping or hiking that they take greater physical risks just to show their peers they can cut it. Girls and non-binary students so afraid to go to the bathroom in the backcountry that they don't go and end up sick. I mean, these are all stories that I've heard in the 10 years I've been doing this work. I have so many more, and I'm Native American students being told they don't respect the environment when they were leaving offerings, and that was misconstrued by instructors as bad LNT. So these are the sort of scenarios that can create that cosmic harm. And so maybe you've seen an incident like this happen, or maybe you're an actor in it, and sometimes it makes me angry and sad, and I share in that frustration. I think there's still a lot of work to be done, but there'll be good news at the end. So some of the work that I think that still needs to be done, I still see that leaders in this space think of DEI or JEDI work. I didn't come up with JEDI. It was Marcelo Bonta, who is founder of Center for Diversity in the Environment. So folks think this work is really technical, like give me the top 10 best practices, give me the check boxes, the toolkits. But it's really adaptive work. It requires culture change and it requires a lot of individual reflection. Some leaders think that the work is really linear, like you're gonna set up a bunch of waypoints and like we get from this to this to this and this, and then we'll arrive. And the work is really iterative, and we never really arrive. I have not arrived. I'm on this journey. Others think that just like a one-off workshop every year for their staff is gonna do the trick. Like, come teach us a workshop. when Jedi is much more holistic. It has to be part of the DNA of your organization. Some leaders come to us, especially as board members, and say, like, we really want to do this work, it's the right thing to do, but once it comes time, like go time, they realize it really involves examining their own identities and being uncomfortable, and they're just not as willing to lean into that discomfort and have that kind of fixed mindset. And then there continues to be a hyper focus on representation and demographics, which means culture pieces. So like, how many people of color work in our staff? How many people of color are taking our programs? How many women? And when you focus just on that, you're not focusing on the culture of this room, the culture within your organizations. And so folks kind of, they enter this space and then they leave because they don't feel that sense of belonging. But I will just say that's work that needs to be done. But since I've been working in this industry for, I said nearly a decade as if it was a long time, but there are people here who've been working in this industry for much longer. But I feel like even that decade has given me enough of that long view to see that change is happening. Like just the number of hands that were raised when I asked how many of you are doing DEI work. If I asked that 10 years ago, people would be like, what's DEI? And there'd be like 2 hands that went up. So a lot of good work is happening. This work is being prioritized. A lot of your organizations have dedicated staff doing this work. It's showing up in core competencies and evals of your staff and your participants. Some of you are tracking inclusion incidents, such as the ones I rattled off earlier. There's been significant progress on gender identity inclusion. I love the fact, I'm not wearing my sari, but I love that we have pronouns on our tags, and that disclosing pronouns is par for the course in most organizations. Most spaces are acknowledging the land and the indigenous peoples on whose land we hold events like this, as well as run our programs. I think there's still a little more work to do overall in making it a more authentic thing than just like land acknowledgement check, but that's a whole different conversation. So a lot of good things are happening. And so you're probably wondering, like, what should I do? Like, what can I do? And again, I'm not here to tell you all the things to do. I just will urge you to attend all those sessions that are focused on these topics. I actually started circling them I borrowed a pen from Rebecca Bear, and I started circling them around lunchtime in the program, and I realized there were so many presentations that were related to these topics in all of the tracks that I couldn't actually circle all of them. So I would just say look for those topics. They're topics on culturally appropriate and inclusive risk management and decolonizing risk management, gender identity inclusion. There's sessions on ableism, masculinity, heterosexism, a lot of sessions on sexual misconduct, ability inclusion, and then there's just so many. I'm just going to stop there, but y'all should attend those because that's where you'll learn like kind of some of the things you can start doing. Okay, so I'll just end with this. I'm feeling a lot of gratitude and again, like real gratified with the whole like about time to be recognized for this work because I've been doing it for a long time for me, and I've been putting a lot of emotional labor into it. But to be clear, this award really isn't about me. Audre Lorde said something along the lines of, there are no new truths, just new ways of making them felt. And I think maybe I've just had the opportunity to innovate new ways of making these truths felt, like the truths being that like emotional harm is part of risk management. People need to be culturally competent or that isn't actually a risk. And there's so many people who've been working before me to shift this paradigm. Nina Roberts, whom Jay mentioned, Robin Childs, who's in this room. Raise your hand, Robin. There you go, Robin. Keta Gonzalez, Carolyn Finney. These are just naming a few people on whose shoulders I stand in doing this work. My teachers, really. In fact, I learned something new like minutes before my talk from Robin. Many others are also working with me, now to shift this paradigm. Justin Forrest Parks is sitting over there. Erica Nelson, Sophie Sarkar, CJ Golding, Jose Gonzalez, Jalen Goff, Jolie Varela, Amanda Machado, and organizations and social media influencers like Native Women's Wilderness, Unlikely Hikers. So I would just urge you all to look for these stories that aren't told. And then I want to thank you all, because I don't think I'd be getting this award unless you all were actually doing this work, right? I mean, if I hadn't been telling you to work, and then me and a bunch of others, and you hadn't been doing it, then this recognition wouldn't be happening. So clearly, you all are doing the work, and you're you're making strides in doing the work. So really, thank you all. This is a real honor, and I will leave it at that and let you all go have dinner.
So Rafael Rosa, pronouns he from the steering committee as well. I'm really here just to remind you that you've got a couple fantastic days ahead of you. I am the last thing between dinner, so